All right, 7th graders, I'm going to finish up those questions on the test review. So number 8 is negative 8/13 divided by 2/5. So a lot of you choose to do your keep, change, flip, skip, flip, multiply. Some of you choose to find a common denominator, and that also works for division. Absolutely. I'm going to keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep my first fraction. I'm going to change my division to multiplication, and I'm going to flip over that second fraction. Then I'm going to look and say, is there anything I can simplify here? Well, 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 8 4 times. It just makes my multiplication a little bit easier. Then I'm going to multiply straight across the top, straight across the bottom. Negative times a positive is a negative. Use your little hashtag for multiplying and dividing. And we see a negative times a positive is a negative. 4 times 5 is 20. 13 times 1 is 13. Now, because this is improper, the numerator is greater than the denominator, we have to rewrite this as a mixed number in simplest form. So if this is a multiple choice question, your final answer on the test might be a mixed number if you got an improper. So you got to be able to do that. So first of all, my answer is definitely going to be negative. How many times does 13 go into 20? 13 goes into 20 one time, with how many left over? 7 left over. So it would be negative 1 and 7/13. Once you're at this point, your teachers have talked to you about bottoming out if you need to. So you would do 13 into 20. 13 goes into 20 once. 1 times 13 is 13. Subtract off. 20 minus 13 is 7. So that's where we come up with the 7/13. Okay. Let's take a look at number 9. Number 9, you're expected to be able to multiply decimals. Negative times a negative is a positive using your hashtag. Now we just have to multiply these decimals. 7.9 times 9.4. First of all, in multiplication, you don't have to line up decimal points. You just multiply as though the decimals weren't there and then figure out where to place the decimal point. I like to estimate first. So like 7.9, I would say is about 8. 9.4 is about 9. So when I multiply those, I know my final answer has to be somewhere around 72. And then I say, okay, that helps me know where my decimal point absolutely has to go. So this is just a little estimation off to the side. But I'm actually going to long multiply. 4 times 9 is 36. Put down a 6, carry a 3. 4 times 7 is 28, and 3 more, 28, 29, 30, 31. 0 placeholder. You'll notice no decimal points in the middle here. 9 times 9 is 81. Put down a 1, carry an 8. 9 times 7 is 63, and 8 more is that 71. We're going to add those up. 6, 1, 3 plus 1 is 4, and then we have our 7. And again, because I estimated ahead of time, I don't have I know exactly where my decimal needs to go. But if you're not sure, you can remember count over 1, count over 1. That means I've counted over 1, 2. So in my final answer, I count over 2. And that's how we come up with that. Let's take a look at number 10. We're going to simplify the following expression. All right. So here we're actually going to subtract some decimals. You have to simplify within parentheses first, order of operations. And we're going to subtract some decimals. This is where we have to line up our decimal points. So we have 287. We'll put the decimal point there. Lining up my place value. So in my tens place, I have a 7. In my ones place, I have an 8. So that has to be in the ones place. Then I have my decimal point. Then in the tens place, I have a 2. If I'm going to do this subtraction, I don't have a number here in the tens place. Oh, I'll fill in a 0. And now I'm ready to subtract. I can't take 2 away from 0, so I borrow from the 7. The 7 becomes a 6. This becomes a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. Now your decimal point drags right down. Can't take 8 from 6. Borrow from this 8. Make that 8 a 7. 6 minus 8 is... Oh, that's a 16 now. Sorry, I borrowed from that 7. That's a 16 now. 16 minus 8 is 8. 7 minus 7 is 0. And I drag down my 2. So this is 208.8. Had more positives, keep my positive, divided by negative 0.5. Okay, positive divided by a negative. I know my final answer will be a negative. And now let's do this division. So if I'm taking 0.5 into 208.8, kind of hate that they both move one because then kids can't see why, what really happens. But the whole point is the number outside has to be written as a whole number. So that has to become a 5. So if I'm moving that to the right one, that forces this to get moved to the right one. So then I'm dividing it into 2,088. And I have my decimal point now way over here. And I drag it right up. Now I just divide as I normally would. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract off. 0, drag down an 8. How many times does 5 go into 8? 5 goes into 8 once. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract off. 8 minus 5 is 3. Drag down an 8. How many times does 5 go into 38? 5 goes into 38 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract off. 38 minus 35 is 3. Then you have to drag down a 0. And how many times does 5 go into 30? 5 goes into 36 times. So my final answer is a negative 417.6. Yep. All right, let's keep going. Number 11. What is the value of the expression below? Okay, as I look at this, I say, can anything zero out? So I first look for additive inverses. Negative 4/5, positive 4/5. Those are additive inverses. So negative 4/5, positive 4/5, additive inverses. The sum of that would be the identity of 0. Okay, good. So then it's like, ooh, good. That's gone. That's gone. So then the problem we really are working on is 3/8 plus a negative becomes a minus. I like single signs. So 3/8 minus 8/3. In order to add or subtract fractions, we must find a common denominator. Our common denominator will be 24. So I'll multiply numerator and denominator of this one by 3. Numerator and denominator of this one by 8. That way our denominator is a 24. 3 times 3, this is 9 24ths minus 8 times 8 is 64 24ths. And now I look, I say, okay, I'd be starting up, because now I only have to focus on the numerators. My denominator at the end of the day is a 24, right? Talking about 24ths, I'm still talking about 24ths in the answer when I'm adding or subtracting. So I just focus on my numerators now. And this says to me, if I was at a positive 9 on the number line, and I had to move left 64 places. So in my head, again, I really do this every time. I have a 0. I'm like, okay, I'm over at a positive 9, and I have to move 64 places to the left. Oh, I'm definitely ending up over here on the negative side. Well, signs are different. I find the difference. So off to the side, I do my scrap, and I do 64 minus 9. What's 64 minus 9? Let's see, this becomes a 5, this becomes a 14. 14 minus 9 is 5. Hopefully I'm right. So is that 55? That seems reasonable, because 64 minus 10 would be 54. So now I say, what do I have more of? Oh, I have more negatives. I had 64 negatives, only 9 positives. I'm at a negative 55. Now I have to rewrite this as a mixed number because this is improper. It's definitely going to be greater than 1 because 55 24ths, larger number on top. So I have 24 goes into 55. Well, what's 24 times 2? 24 times 2. Is that going to get me to 48? Yes. Okay. So I know it goes in 2 times. So 24 goes into 55 2 times. My answer is definitely a negative. Don't lose that negative. Goes in 2 times. With how many left over? So 48 to 55. 48, 49, 50, and then 5. Okay, so it looks like 7 left over. So that's 7 24ths. So negative 2 and 7 24ths would be that answer. Oh. All right, let's go on to number 12. There's 13 problems, I believe, on tomorrow's test. And these parallel that beautifully. So if you go through this review and really own this review and know you have it, then your test should feel okay. It says the water level in Ricky Lake changes at a rate of negative 8/15 inches per year. So it's going down. It's going down maybe about a ½ inch a year. Negative 8/15 every year. Based on the rate above, how much will the water level change after 3 years? Okay, so in year 1, it drops 8/15. In year 2, it drops 8/15. And in year 3, it drops 8/15. So you'd either have to add 8/15, 8/15, 8/15, or repeated addition. We multiply by 3. So negative 8/15 times 3. 3 is the same as 3 over 1. I'm going to go ahead and simplify first. You could choose to multiply straight across the top, straight across the bottom, then simplify. I'm choosing to simplify first. 3 goes into 3 once. 3 goes into 15 5 times. Straight across the top. Negative 8 times 1 is a negative 8. 5 times 1 is 5. Again, we have an improper. Water level's going down. So it's going to be a negative. How many times does 5 go into 8? 5 goes into 8 once. And then how many left over? 3/5. Good. And I estimated, like I knew 8/15, like 7.5/15 would be a ½ inch. So I knew it's around a ½ inch. I like to estimate so I know if my answers make sense. So I'm like, okay. If it's about a ½ inch a year and it's happening for 3 years, ½ inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches. So I know overall it's going to drop about 1.5 inches. And I'm like, oh, good. Negative 1 3/5. Definitely dropping about 1.5 inches. All right, part B. When written in decimal form, is your answer to part A a repeating decimal or a terminating decimal? Justify your answer. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify from this part because now I can easily do my bottom out to go from a fraction to a decimal. You know your final answer is going to be 1 point something. So I'm going to bottom out the 5. So if I have negative 8/5, I know my answer will be negative. The negative's not going anywhere. I'm going to bottom out the 5. How many times does 5 go into 8? Drag up that decimal point. 5 goes into 8 once. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract off 3. Drag down a 0. How many does 5 go into 30? 5 goes into 30 6 times. So negative 1.6. So this is a terminating decimal. Terminating means it ends. You could put a series of zeros after it, but this ends in the 10th place. So this is terminating. That's a terminating decimal. I see 3/5. If I multiplied, this is just another way to check yourself. 3/5. If I multiply top and bottom by 2, I'd get negative 1. 3 times 2 is 6. 5 times 2 is 10. Negative 1 6/10. Yep, negative 1 6/10. I do lots of estimating and checking of my work to make sure things seem reasonable. All right, we got one more, and we only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to tell you I'm not going to be able to do this review in 2 takes. I'm going to have to make a 3rd video for just that last problem. All right.